The sun burned hot on the surface of the barren planet. It was a lonely place, covered with dry rocks and dust. There was no sign of life, no trees or plants, just the endless empty land. In the distance, a small, weak figure stumbled through the desert, her body covered in a thin, ragged robe. Her name was Princess Lyra, and she had been abandoned. Lyra was the youngest princess of the Altharim people, a race of powerful and proud aliens. She was born to lead, to rule her people, but her health was fragile. She had always been weak, unable to live up to the expectations of her powerful family. And so, when her enemies in the royal court saw an opportunity, they acted quickly. Without warning, Lyra was cast out. The leaders of her people decided she was a burden, a symbol of weakness that would hurt their future. They left her on this remote planet, far away from any help, to die alone. They thought she would never survive. But they were wrong. Now, alone on the planet, Lyra's body ached with hunger and thirst. Her strength was fading, and she could feel herself slipping into darkness. The sun was high, and the heat was unbearable. She had been walking for hours, looking for shelter, but there was nothing in sight. Only rocks, dirt, and empty space. Lyra stumbled and fell to her knees, tears in her eyes. She had no idea where she was, or how long she had been walking. All she knew was that she was alone. The sounds of the winds blowing through the barren land were the only thing she could hear. There was no one to save her. Her people had abandoned her, and now she was left to die. As she lay there, her mind wandered to the life she had once known. She remembered her father's palace, the beautiful gardens, the sounds of laughter, and the warmth of her family. She remembered the day she was crowned, when the entire kingdom had cheered for her. She had been proud then, thinking she would rule wisely and bring peace to her people, but that was all in the past now. Her breath came in short gasps. She was too tired to move, too weak to stand. The world around her seemed to blur. Just when she thought she couldn't go any further, something caught her eye. Far in the distance, she saw something moving across the sky. At first, it looked like a bird or a large creature, but then she realized it was too big. It was a ship, a human ship. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe her eyes. Humans, on this planet. She had heard stories of humans, wild, unpredictable creatures. But she never thought they would come here. Could they help her? With her last bit of strength, she pushed herself to her feet. Her legs shook with weakness, but she refused to give up. She had to get their attention. She had to try. She waved her arms, hoping someone on the ship would see her. The ship was still far away, but Lyra knew she had to act quickly. She couldn't waste any more time. She started running, her steps slow and shaky. The dry ground was hard to walk on, and her body screamed for rest. But Lyra pushed on. Her vision blurred, and her head felt heavy, but she kept going. She thought of the cold stone walls of her former palace, of the way she had been treated, and the hope of being saved by someone, anyone. As she ran, the ship drew closer. It seemed to hover in place, as if waiting for her to reach it. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was this a dream? Was she imagining it all? But no, the ship was real. It was coming down, closer and closer. She saw a hatch opening, and a figure appeared in the doorway. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The figure was a man, a human. His eyes were focused on her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra felt a spark of hope. She had been abandoned by her own people, but here was someone, a human, coming to her rescue. She had no idea why he was there, or who he was, but at that moment, she didn't care. She needed help, and he was offering it. The human soldier stepped out of the ship, his movements calm and steady. He looked down at her, his face unreadable. His dog, a large, muscular creature, stood beside him, eyes alert. Lyra's legs finally gave way beneath her, and she collapsed to the ground, exhaustion taking over. She could hardly keep her eyes open as she lay in the dust. The human stepped forward, kneeling beside her. He looked down at her with an expression that seemed both curious and kind. "You're safe now," he said, his voice rough but gentle. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, and she saw him clearly for the first time. A human. A real human. The one who had come to save her when everyone else had turned their back. For the first time in days, Lyra felt a small hope flicker in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for her yet. The loyal human and his dog. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting a warm orange glow over the vast landscape of the planet. The quiet was broken only by the soft hum of the human ship as it descended through the thick atmosphere. Inside the ship, a soldier sat in the pilot's seat, his fingers moving over the controls with practiced ease. He was a tall man, strong and determined, his face hard but calm. His name was Ethan, and he had a mission to complete. Ethan was used to dangerous jobs. As a soldier, he had seen countless battles, faced many enemies, and survived situations that most people would never imagine. But this mission was different. He wasn't here to fight a war or protect his planet. No, this time, he was here to rescue someone. Someone who had been abandoned and left to die. The alien princess. He had been briefed on the situation. The princess had been cast aside by her own people, left on a barren planet with no chance of survival. Ethan had seen the map, read the reports, and heard the stories about the alien race she came from. But none of that mattered. His job was simple. Find her, bring her back, and make sure she was safe. Next to Ethan, sitting quietly on the seat beside him, was his dog, Max. Max was not just a dog. He was a partner, a friend, and a loyal companion. Max had been with Ethan through thick and thin, sharing in every battle and every quiet moment. They understood each other without words, communicating with a look, a gesture, or a simple command. Max was as much a part of this mission as Ethan was. Ethan glanced over at his dog, and Max wagged his tail in response, as if to say, "Let's get this done." The dog's brown eyes sparkled with energy and intelligence, and his large frame looked ready for whatever might come. Max had been trained to fight, to track, and to protect. He was a soldier in his own right, and Ethan trusted him with his life. As the ship continued its descent, Ethan's mind raced with thoughts about the mission. The reports had said the planet was dangerous, with harsh weather and strange wildlife. But Ethan wasn't worried. He had been through worse. Besides, he had Max. Together, they could handle anything. The ship touched down on the dusty ground with a soft thud, its engines shutting down with a low rumble. Ethan grabbed his gear, adjusted his blaster on his hip, and stood up. Max followed closely behind, his tail still wagging. "Stay close, Max," Ethan said softly, his voice steady. The dog's ears perked up, and he gave a quick bark in response. Ethan smiled to himself. Good boy. First encounter. Princess Lyra's heart raced as she looked at the man standing before her. His strong, broad figure was unlike anything she had ever seen. He wasn't like the cold, distant alien she had known all her life. No, this human seemed different. He wasn't here to hurt her. She could tell that much. His calm, steady voice had eased her fears, but now she had so many questions. Why was he here? How had he found her on this desolate planet? The human smiled gently, offering his hand. "I'm Ethan," he said softly. "This is Max," he added, gesturing to the large dog sitting quietly beside him. Lyra's eyes moved to the dog. The creature was not like the animals she was used to either. Its coat was thick and dark, and its eyes gleamed with intelligence. The dog's posture was alert, yet somehow relaxed, as though it trusted the human completely. Lyra hesitated, looking between Ethan and Max. She had been abandoned, left to die by her own people. For so long, she had felt the sting of rejection, of being alone in a vast, cold universe. But now, here was this human, this stranger, and his dog, who were offering her something she hadn't had in days. Safety. She couldn't bring herself to trust them completely, But she knew she had no other choice. She had to accept their help. With trembling hands, she reached out and took Ethan's hand. His grip was firm but gentle, as though he could sense her fear. "You're safe now," he repeated, his voice steady. "We'll get you out of here." Lyra nodded slowly, but her voice caught in her throat. "Why? Why did you come for me?" she asked, her voice shaky from both exhaustion and confusion. Ethan looked at her with a quiet expression. "I was sent to find you. Your people, they left you here. I won't leave anyone behind. Not if I can help it." Lyra swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. Her people had turned their backs on her, but this human, this stranger, had come all this way to rescue her. For a moment, she could hardly believe it. She glanced at Max, who was now sniffing the ground near her feet. The dog's nose twitched as it studied her. His presence, calm and reassuring, made her feel a little less afraid. The princess looked at Ethan again. "What happens now?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where will you take me?" Ethan took a deep breath. "First, we get you to the ship. Then, we'll figure out what to do next. You're not alone anymore." Lyra could hardly believe his words. She had been abandoned to die, left with nothing but the harsh desert and the endless sky. And now, a human soldier had found her. She didn't know if she should trust him. But at that moment, she had no choice but to believe in the kindness of this stranger. Ethan gave her a reassuring nod before turning toward the ship. Max followed closely behind them, his ears perked up, his senses alert. Lyra staggered to her feet, feeling the weight of exhaustion in every step. Her body felt weak, but she had to keep moving. The last thing she wanted was to be left behind again. As they walked toward the ship, Lyra couldn't help but wonder how Ethan had managed to find her. She had been lost on this planet for what seemed like an eternity. Had it really only been a few days? She didn't know. Time had lost all meaning in this desolate place. All she had known was hunger, thirst, and the endless, lonely struggle to survive. But now she had someone to walk beside her. Someone who seemed to care, even though they had just met. Once they reached the ship, Ethan helped her up the ramp. It was a sleek, silver craft, with smooth, metallic surfaces reflecting the setting sun. The door closed behind them with a soft hiss, and for the first time in days, Lyra felt the cool, controlled air of the ship wrap around her. It was a relief, something she hadn't realized she needed until now. Inside, the ship was quiet and orderly. Ethan led her to a small seat, where she sank down gratefully, her legs trembling. Max jumped onto the floor nearby, laying down with a soft thud. Ethan moved quickly around the ship, securing the door and preparing for takeoff. Lyra watched him, still in awe that this human had come to her rescue. She had been so close to giving up, so close to accepting her fate, but now she wasn't alone. Ethan returned to her side, crouching down so they were eye to eye. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice kind but serious. Lyra nodded, her eyes meeting his. I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice still soft. "I never thought anyone would come for me." "You're not alone anymore," Ethan repeated, his voice reassuring. He paused for a moment, then added, "I don't know what your people did to you, but I won't leave you here. You deserve better than this." Lyra's throat tightened. She had always known that her life was different, but hearing Ethan's words made her realize just how much she had been betrayed by her own. She had never asked to be a princess, never wanted to carry the weight of her people's expectations. All she had wanted was to be accepted. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't allowed in so long: hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan smiled softly. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just doing my job." But Lyra could see the kindness in his eyes, the sincerity behind his words. In that moment, she knew that this human, Ethan, and his dog, Max, were her new hope. They were her family now, the only ones who had cared enough to save her. And for the first time in days, Lyra allowed herself to relax, her shoulders no longer tense with fear. She was safe. A dangerous attack. The hum of the ship's engines filled the air as the craft moved smoothly through the sky, the stars stretching out in every direction. Princess Lyra sat quietly, her body still weak, but her mind racing. She had been rescued. She was safe, at least for now. But she couldn't shake the feeling that danger was never far behind. She had been abandoned by her people. Who was to say they wouldn't come after her? Ethan was at the control panel, his fingers moving swiftly over the buttons as he guided the ship through the starred expanse. Max, the loyal dog, lay at the foot of Lyra's seat, his eyes open and alert, his ears twitching with every sound. The atmosphere inside the ship was calm, but there was an underlying tension. They didn't know what lay ahead, and Ethan knew that this rescue mission might not be as simple as it seemed. Lyra couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions, relief, fear, and confusion all tangled together. She had been left on that barren planet to die, and now, in the safety of this strange human ship, she didn't know what to think anymore. She had heard stories about humans, how they were fierce warriors and protectors of their own. But could she trust this man? Was he really different from the ones who had betrayed her? Max let out a soft growl, breaking her thoughts. His head turned sharply toward the window. Ethan's hands froze on the controls as he looked up at the dog, a quick flash of concern crossing his face. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked quietly. Max's low growl grew louder, his eyes locked on something outside the ship. He stood up, his body tense, his muscles coiled and ready to spring into action. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the change in the air. The ship's steady hum seemed to slow, and her instincts told her something was wrong. Very wrong. Ethan quickly tapped a few buttons on the control panel, pulling up the ship's external sensors. His eyes widened when he saw the results. He swore under his breath. "We've got company," he muttered, his voice steady but serious. Lyra's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? Who's out there?" Ethan didn't look up from the control panel, but he answered quickly. "It's not good. They're not just any ships. They're from your planet." The princess' face went pale. "My people," she whispered, her voice filled with dread. "They must have tracked your signal," Ethan said, turning to her with a grim look. "They're coming after us." Before Lyra could say anything more, the ship lurched violently. A loud, echoing boom rang through the cabin, and the lights flickered. Max barked, jumping to his feet, his fur bristling. Ethan's hands flew across the controls, trying to steady the ship, but it was no use. The attack was happening fast. Lyra was thrown against her seat as another blast hit the side of the ship. She gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. The ship groaned under the pressure, and she could feel it shaking from the impact. She reached for the seat's armrest to steady herself, fear rising in her throat. "Hold on," Ethan shouted, his voice full of command. "We're going to need to move fast." Lyra clung to the seat, her eyes wide with fear. "What are they doing? Why are they attacking us?" "They want you back," Ethan said, his face set with determination. "And they'll do whatever it takes to get you." Lyra's mind raced. She had never imagined her people would go this far to bring her back, especially after abandoning her so callously. But the blast and the sudden attack made it clear. They weren't just looking to talk. They wanted her, and they weren't going to stop until they had her in their control. The ship lurched again, this time even harder, and the lights flickered out. A dark, suffocating silence filled the cabin. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything except her own racing heartbeat. Ethan cursed under his breath, his voice cutting through the silence. "They've disabled our communication system. I can't call for backup." Max barked again, louder this time, a warning sound. The dog's body was low to the ground, ready for a fight. His ears were pinned back, and his eyes gleamed with focus. Ethan grabbed his blaster from his belt and quickly checked the safety. "Stay close, Lyra," he said, his voice urgent. It's about to get dangerous. Lyra's heart beat faster as she looked up at Ethan, his calm demeanor somehow reassuring, even in the face of danger. He seemed to have everything under control, but she couldn't shake the fear in her chest. They had been attacked. They were being hunted by her own people, and she had no idea what would happen next. A sudden crash rattled the ship, and the sound of footsteps pounding on the metal floor echoed through the hallways. The attackers had boarded the ship. They were here. Ethan didn't hesitate. He motioned for Max to follow and led the way down the narrow corridor. "Stay behind me," he instructed Lyra, "and keep low." Lyra did as he said, her heart pounding in her chest as she followed behind him, trying to stay out of the line of fire. Max was at the front now, his body tense, moving swiftly and silently. The dog's sharp senses were already alert, and Lyra could see the protective way he moved around Ethan. She could only hope that Ethan and his dog would be enough to keep them safe. As they reached the ship's main hatch, the door suddenly burst open with a loud screech. Two tall, dark figures stood in the doorway, their weapons raised. "Stay back," Ethan shouted, his blaster aimed at them. Lyra's heart raced as the first alien took a step forward. They were here. The attackers had found them, and there was no turning back now. Getting to know each other. The ship shook again, but this time, the attacks had stopped. Lyra clung to her seat, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had been through so much in such a short time. One moment, she had been abandoned, left to die on a desolate planet. The next, she was rescued by a human, a stranger, who had fought to protect her from her own people. Ethan was at the control panel, his face focused and calm. The ship's systems had been damaged, but he was working quickly to repair them. Max, the loyal dog, was lying at his feet, watching over him with alert eyes. The ship had taken a few hits, but they had made it through the worst of it. For now, they were safe. Lyra sat quietly in the seat beside Ethan, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had so many questions, so many things she didn't understand. The human had saved her, yes, but who was he really? Why had he come for her? What was his life like? And most of all, why had he chosen to risk everything for someone like her? Ethan glanced over at Lyra, sensing her unease. He was glad they were safe for the moment, but he could see the questions in her eyes. She had been through a lot, and he knew that now was the time to talk. He had to make her understand, make her see that she could trust him. He spoke softly, his voice steady and kind. "Are you okay?" Lyra nodded slowly, but she didn't speak at first. Her mind was racing, still processing everything. After a long pause, she looked up at Ethan, her eyes searching his face. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. I'm not like you. I don't understand." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "You don't have to be like me to deserve help," he said simply. "I saw what happened to you. I couldn't just walk away." Lyra's eyes filled with confusion. "But why? I'm just a princess. I'm nothing special. I've been thrown away. No one cares about me." "Lyra," Ethan said gently, "you're more than just a princess. You're a person, and every life is worth saving, no matter where you come from or what you've been through." Lyra fell silent, the weight of his words settling over her. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this before. Her whole life, she had been nothing more than a symbol to her people, someone to use and control. She had never been seen as a person, as an individual. But Ethan, this human, was different. He didn't care about her title. He cared about her as a person. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," Ethan replied with a small smile. "I just did what anyone would do. Besides, you've got a long road ahead. We'll figure things out together." Lyra wasn't sure what he meant by that, but she was too exhausted to ask more. Her body ached from the long days of walking, the harsh environment, and the stress of being attacked. But there was something else, something deeper. It was a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. Hope. She glanced over at Max, the dog who had never left her side since she had been rescued. The animal's fur was thick and dark, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He had the look of a warrior, but there was a calmness about him. He had protected her just as much as Ethan had. "Your dog," Lyra said quietly, looking at Max. "He's amazing. He's been watching over me." Ethan chuckled softly. "Yeah, Max is something else. He's not just any dog. He's been with me for years. I trust him more than anyone. He knows when something's wrong before I do." Lyra smiled weakly. "He's been my only friend here, even if he's a bit scary sometimes." Max wagged his tail at the sound of his name, then sat up and walked over to Lyra. He nudged her gently with his nose, as if offering comfort. Lyra's smile grew a little bigger, and she reached out to pet him. Max's eyes softened, and he leaned into her touch, his fur warm beneath her fingers. "You're lucky to have him," Lyra said, her voice soft but sincere. Ethan nodded. "I know. He's saved my life more times than I can count. And now he's saving yours." For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a spark of something she hadn't felt since her world had turned upside down. She felt safe. It was strange, almost unreal. She had spent so long alone, abandoned by everyone she had ever known. But now, there was this human, this dog, who had come to her rescue. They weren't just strangers. They were becoming her new family. As the ship flew through the stars, Lyra sat quietly beside Ethan and Max, the three of them surrounded by the comforting hum of the engines. The journey ahead was uncertain, and Lyra didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in a long time: hope. Ethan looked over at her again, his eyes soft with understanding. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said. "We don't have to figure it all out now. The important thing is, you're not alone anymore." Lyra met his gaze, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. She didn't know how this human had managed to do what no one else had done, but she was thankful. He had saved her life. He had given her a chance when no one else had. "Thank you, Ethan," she said softly. Ethan smiled, his eyes warm. "You don't need to thank me. We're in this together, okay?" Lyra nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. She wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The escape. The ship hummed steadily, the stars stretching out in all directions as it cut through space. Inside, Lyra sat quietly by the window, watching the dark void outside. Her mind was still spinning. Her whole world had been turned upside down. One moment, she was a princess in a palace, surrounded by luxury and power. The next, she was a fugitive, fleeing from her own people with only a human and his dog for company. She glanced over at Ethan, who was busy at the control panel, adjusting the ship's systems. Max lay at his feet, his eyes half closed, but his ears always alert, listening for any hint of danger. The dog was protective of her, always watching over her, even when she didn't notice. She couldn't help but feel a strange sense of comfort in the dog's presence. Ethan turned toward her and smiled briefly. "We're almost there," he said, his voice steady, but with a hint of tension underneath. "It'll take a few more minutes to reach the escape route I've planned." Lyra nodded, her heart racing. "Escape route," she repeated softly, almost not believing it. "Where are we going?" Ethan's eyes were serious as he looked at her. "Somewhere safe," he said simply. "I know a place. It's not much, but it'll be a start. We need to get out of the reach of your people. I'm not sure how long we can keep ahead of them." Lyra felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The thought of leaving everything behind, the palace, the life she had known, was difficult. But she had no choice. Her people had turned on her, leaving her for dead on that planet. They had shown no mercy, and she knew they wouldn't stop until they had her back. Ethan's hand moved over the control panel, his fingers quickly pressing buttons. The hum of the ship's engines changed pitch, signaling that they were nearing their destination. Lyra stood up, her legs still a little shaky from everything she had been through. She walked over to the window, peering out into the deep black of space. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short time. She had gone from being the heir to a powerful throne to running for her life. "I know this is a lot to take in," Ethan said, breaking into her thoughts. "But we're going to get through this. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." Lyra turned to face him, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. She didn't understand why he was so determined to help her. They were from different worlds, different species. Why would he risk everything for her? "Why are you doing this?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling. "I don't deserve it. I'm just a princess. My people abandoned me." Ethan's face softened, his eyes full of understanding. "You're not just a princess, Lyra," he said quietly. "You're a person, and no one deserves to be abandoned like that. No one deserves to be hunted." Lyra felt her chest tighten at his words. She had never been seen as a person by her people. She had always been a symbol, a tool to be used for political gain. But with Ethan, she felt seen, heard, and protected. It was a feeling she hadn't had in so long. Before she could respond, the ship jolted. Max stood up, his body tense, his eyes wide and alert. Ethan quickly turned to the control panel, his fingers flying over the buttons. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "What's happening?" she asked urgently. "We're being followed," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "They're close. They've found us." Lyra's stomach dropped. She had hoped they had gained some distance, but her people were persistent. They wouldn't stop hunting her until they had her back. She could only imagine what they would do to her if they caught her. Ethan's voice was steady, but there was a sense of urgency in it. "Brace yourself, Lyra. This is going to get rough." Lyra's heart raced as she gripped the nearest seat. She could hear the sound of ships approaching, their engines roaring louder with each passing second. Ethan worked quickly, adjusting the ship's speed, trying to dodge their pursuers. But the enemy ships were fast, and they were closing in. Max growled low in his throat. His eyes locked on the door, as if he could sense the danger before it arrived. Ethan glanced at him, his jaw set with determination. "I'm going to need you to be ready, Max," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. Max's ears perked up, and he barked once, as if understanding the plan. He moved to the door, standing guard. Lyra could see the bond between Ethan and his dog. Max wasn't just a pet. He was a warrior, loyal and fierce. "We're almost at the escape route," Ethan said, his voice tight with focus. "We just need to make it through the next few minutes." Lyra could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The enemy ships were almost on top of them, their weapons charging for an attack. She could hear the crackling of energy blasts outside, the sounds of battle drawing nearer. Ethan's hands moved with lightning speed, pushing the ship's controls to the limit. The ship jolted again, but this time it was different. They were accelerating, moving faster than before, trying to outrun the attackers. The ship dipped and swerved, narrowly avoiding blasts that streaked through space. Lyra gasped as the ship took a sharp turn, throwing her against the side. She held on tightly, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Max barked again, and Ethan called out to him, giving orders that Lyra couldn't quite hear. The dog was moving swiftly, ready for whatever came next. Then, just as the enemy ships closed in, Ethan's voice rang out, triumphant. "We're here." Lyra looked out the window just in time to see a bright flash of light. The ship shot forward, breaking through a hidden space tunnel, leaving their pursuers behind. The enemy ships were too slow to follow. For a moment, everything was silent. The ship's engines hummed softly, and Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They had escaped, but she knew the danger wasn't over. They had only bought themselves a little time. Ethan leaned back in his seat, a satisfied smile on his face. That was close, he said, his voice lighter now. But we made it. Lyra stared out the window, her heart still racing. They were safe for now, but the journey ahead was far from easy. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Ethan and Max were the only ones she could count on now. A new beginning. The ship drifted quietly through space, far from the chaos they had left behind. Inside, the hum of the engines was soothing, a reminder that for now, they were safe. Lyra sat by the window, looking out at the stars. The dark void of space stretched on forever, but now it didn't feel as empty. With Ethan and Max by her side, the vastness of space seemed a little less lonely. Ethan was at the control panel, working on the ship's systems. The journey had been long and difficult, but they had made it. They were heading toward a new place, a place where no one knew them, a place where they could start over. It wasn't much, but it was better than being hunted. Max lay at Ethan's feet, his eyes half closed but his ears always alert. The dog had been a constant companion through everything, offering comfort and protection when it was needed most. Lyra glanced at him, a soft smile on her face. Max was more than just a dog. He was a warrior, loyal to the end. How much longer? Lyra asked, breaking the silence. She wasn't sure if she was asking about the journey or about her own future. Either way, the question lingered in the air. Ethan glanced over at her, his expression thoughtful. "A few hours, maybe less," he replied. "We'll be there soon." Lyra nodded, though the nervousness in her stomach didn't go away. She had never been this far from home before. She had never been this far from everything she knew. The thought of starting over, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the people she had come to trust, was both thrilling and terrifying. "What happens when we get there?" Lyra asked, her voice soft, almost uncertain. Ethan turned his chair toward her, his gaze steady. "We find a place to settle down," he said simply. "Maybe work for a while. Keep a low profile until we're sure it's safe. And we live." Lyra's heart ached at the word live. It was something she hadn't done in so long. She had been running, hiding, surviving, but living? It felt like a dream. She had never had the chance to live for herself, to choose her own path. She had always been surrounded by expectations, her life decided for her before she even had a say. Now, with Ethan and Max, it was different. She had a chance to choose. She had a chance to decide what she wanted from life, without anyone telling her what to do. The thought of it was both exciting and terrifying. "Do you think we'll be okay?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's eyes softened, and he gave her a small, reassuring smile. "We will," he said. "As long as we stick together, we'll be fine." Lyra looked at him, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. She trusted him. She trusted him in a way she had never trusted anyone else. Ethan had risked everything to help her, to protect her. And for that, she was grateful beyond words. But it was more than that. He had given her something she hadn't known she was missing. Hope. Lyra leaned back in her seat, her eyes closing for a moment. She had been so focused on surviving, on getting away from the dangers that had followed her, that she hadn't allowed herself to think about what might come next. But now, for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to think about the future. Maybe it wasn't as uncertain as it had seemed before. Maybe, just maybe, she had a chance at something better. Max stirred at her feet, and she smiled as she reached down to pet him. He nudged her hand gently, his eyes soft and trusting. The dog had been with her through the worst of it, and now he was here to see her through the rest of it. Lyra's heart swelled with gratitude. With Ethan and Max by her side, she felt like she wasn't alone anymore. Maybe she didn't have everything, but she had something more important, a chance. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if everything had been different?" Lyra asked, her voice soft and distant. "What if I had never been a princess? What if I had lived a normal life?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, as if thinking over her question. "I don't know," he said finally, "but sometimes the life you think you want isn't the life you need. And maybe you weren't meant to be a princess. Maybe you were meant for something more." Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide. She had never thought about it that way. Maybe he was right. Maybe the life she had been living wasn't the one she was supposed to have. Maybe this new life, with all its uncertainty, was the one that was meant for her. She could choose who she wanted to be. She could choose her future. The stars outside the window seemed to shine brighter now. Lyra smiled softly, feeling a spark of something new inside her. The past was behind her, and the future was wide open. For the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it.